changes in society, and it did not escape their notice that stealing a spoon got you hanged, but evicting a family of 5 to freeze to death in the streets? That's just good business. People wondered if all these executions might have something to do with the fact that rich people made all the laws. So sometimes the desire to abolish capital punishment was part of a larger desire to transform society. More on that later. And there were abolitionists, even back then, including Charles Dickens, the author of Oliver Twist and The Muppet Christmas Carol. In 1840, he attended the public execution of a man named Francois Courvoisier, a butler who had cut the throat of his master while he slept. That's right. The butler did it. The story of a servant who killed his master obviously had a lot of rich people looking over their shoulders, and it attracted a good deal of attention. 40,000 people turned out to watch Courvoisier hang. The theory was that public executions would deter criminals, but Dickens described it like this.
I did not see one token in all the immense crowd of any emotion suitable to the occasion. No sorrow, no salutary terror, no abhorrence, no seriousness. Nothing but ribaldry, debauchery, levity, drunkenness, and flaunting vice in 50 other shapes. I should have deemed it impossible that I could have ever felt any large assemblage of my fellow creatures to be so odious.
Officially, we had the death penalty for loads of crimes, but in practice, only about half of those found guilty actually swung, which was still a lot of people. The rest got pressed into the army, or they were given the cruelest fate that English minds can devise, being sent to live in Australia. So justice was less of a rule and more of a vibe. And the philosopher William Paley, who philosophy students will already be familiar with, said that's a great system. It's nice and flexible. It sets the maximum penalty, but it allows the authorities to be lenient if they require. Paley thought it would be a great way to deter crime, because only the most serious criminals who really need to be made an example of get strung up. You know, people like Andrew Brunning, the Moriarty of tableware. Paley's philosophy was very influential, until another philosopher named Jeremy Bentham came along and tried to knock him down a peg. Bentham pointed out that in practice, this very harsh and vibes-based justice system meant that whether or not you got f***ing hanged was often pretty arbitrary, and therefore the system was very unpopular and easy to corrupt. Because what is corruption but arbitrariness that someone has paid for? Bentham thought that having the death penalty for so many crimes would actually undermine the goal of deterrence, because juries didn't want to find people guilty. They were like, well, he probably did the crime, but I don't know whether he's going to get a slap on the wrist or hanged in front of Sainsbury's, so I'm going to vote not guilty. In 1830, jurors in London petitioned Parliament saying, the fact that you can get the death penalty for forgery means nobody ever gets found guilty of forgery. So by the 19th century, people like Dickens are starting to wonder how capital punishment reflects on everybody else who isn't directly involved. Like, is it making us mean or cruel? Is it suitable for a society that likes to think of itself as civilized? And they're starting to ask, well, does it actually work to stop crime? In theory, it should be easy to answer that. We just need to look at the evidence. Like in France, under the Napoleonic Code, they only had 6 capital crimes, whereas we had hundreds. But the French gentlemen still found enough spoons to get through their soup course. In practice, however, it's a little tricky. This is a graph of murders committed in Britain since 1971, so just after we abolished the death penalty. This is from the Office of National Statistics, and you can see that the murder rate is trending very slightly upwards, in no small part thanks to that big spike in 2003. What the hell was going on there? Was there some kind of rage gas released into the streets or something? Well, in fact, that spike is largely the work of one man, Dr. Harold Shipman, a serial killer who murdered approximately 250 people over a period of decades. He was convicted in 2000, and this graph includes 173 of his murders. Why only 173, I don't know. And they're included in 2003, despite the fact that he didn't kill anybody that year. That we know of. So the Shipman case is just one example of how sometimes crime statistics can have limited uses. Really, those murders should have been spread out over previous years. And there's another example if we jump back to 2001. There's another spike, because 58 Chinese migrants suffocated to death in the back of a lorry in Dover. The lorry driver got done for manslaughter in the UK. Some Chinese gang members got done for it in the Netherlands, where the lorry had started the journey. But do you count that as a crime being committed here, or in the Netherlands, or in China, or all three? The point is, even when you've got the evidence, it can be hard to know how to interpret it. Even right up until abolition, people were still arguing about whether capital punishment works. There was always room for them to go, I think we can look at the evidence the other way. So the public debate and the practical steps to abolition ended up hinging on other questions. And one of those questions, which Bentham and Paley both kind of shied away from, is, do some people deserve to die? In 2011, Werner Herzog released a documentary called Into the Abyss about a man named Michael Perry, who at the time was on death row for murder in Texas and who was in fact executed before the film's release. In addition to interviews with Perry himself, it features interviews with the families of his victims, people who knew him, and some of the staff who work on death row. I have to confess that as soon as Perry started talking, I completely forgot that he murdered 3 people. He comes across as a bit energized and slightly off-kilter in that way that a lot of Americans do, but basically normal? Though of course, had I known one of his victims, I expect I would have felt very differently. Herzog makes the interesting choice to open with the Perry interview, and only after that does he reveal the details of the crimes, which are shocking not only because they're graphic, but also because they seem so pointless. I mean, he killed 3 people in cold blood just to steal a car. Hearing about the Perry murders and how they affected the community, I felt very powerless, very empty. I wanted to do something. I felt very adrift in a hostile world. But that's Werner Herzog for you, I suppose. He can find a way to make even the most banal things seem horrifying.
The dirty dishes in the sink. To me, they represent mayhem and death.
The film reminds me that real people's feelings about capital punishment are sometimes complex and contradictory in ways that a philosophy class doesn't always capture. For instance, there's an interview with the daughter and sister of 2 of the victims who says that she doesn't want to see anybody die, and she would have been satisfied if Perry got life in prison. But she is glad that she went to watch the execution, and she went as a way to remember and honor her mother, and she says that some people deserve to die. Paley said that what people morally deserve is a matter for God. The business of the state is protecting the state. So the only real question is, does capital punishment deter crime? But not everybody thinks of it that way. The philosopher Louis Pogman said that after World War II, the Nazi leaders were executed, and a lot of people would say that they deserved it. And if you agree with those executions, well then really we're just arguing about where to draw the line. This position is called retributivism, and it's coming at the question from a completely different angle than consequentialism, the idea that punishment is about achieving some consequence like deterrence or rehabilitation. Maybe capital punishment doesn't deter crime. Maybe it makes crime even worse. But a philosopher like Pogman would say, that's not what the justice system is for. The point is that you have done something bad and you deserve to be punished. People are going to clip that out of context, aren't they? It's very easy to dismiss this as bloodthirsty or vengeful, but I think it poses some interesting philosophical challenges. For instance, if punishing criminals is just about deterring crime, then why don't we punish innocent people? We could probably deter crime by finding an innocent person, framing them, and giving them a very harsh punishment, but we try not to do that. Why? The retributivist can say, well, because they don't deserve it. But if you're a consequentialist, you have to come up with some explanation that doesn't involve that. Retributivism has often been associated with people being tough on crime, but it needn't be. You could make a retributivist case for improving prison conditions or letting people out sooner on the grounds that this is cruel, they don't deserve it. My country, and several others, sometimes imprisons people without trial in facilities